How do we start from here and get to here? So last spring semester, I took a human communication class. While I wasn't psyched about getting up in front of people and speaking, I was kind of looking forward to the final project, which was to make a presentation about any topic we wanted and how it was relevant to the students of today. I've been a comic book fanatic for a long time, but I never actually delved into the history of black people in the medium. So I thought, yeah, this would be a great idea. And, well, let's just say you'll never see that video again. Anywho, for this year's Black History Month, I've decided to give it another go with better equipment and a lot more style to it. So, without further ado, this is the history of black superheroes. When the comic book industry began to soar in the 1930s, it wasn't a surprise to see that there was a lack of diversity in the sea of Caucasian heroes. What you may not know, though, is that we were present, just not in any important way. We definitely were hitting the pages as any Superman or Batman. Instead, we were reserved to being sidekick characters, and it was almost barely that. Black characters around this time were treated with heavy stereotypes and not given much thought when created. One of the first racially integrated characters in comic book history is the great Lothar, who appeared in 1934 in the first issue of Mandrake the Magician, who was often regarded as the first superhero. Lothar was a prince of 7 nations, but when it came time to become king, he passed up on the chance in order to travel with Mandrake to fight crime and villains around the world. Now, there ain't no way you go from being the king of kings to being the lapdog to some wizard built like the Monopoly Man's illegitimate son, but we'll let it slide here. Anyway, if that wasn't bad enough, he spoke poor English, wore a fez, had short pants, and put a leopard skin on. His most defining trait was his muscles, being called the strongest man in the world, but that title was more of an insult since he was nothing more than that. Something I'd like to stress here is that Lothar was more of a servant than a sidekick. If Mandrake said jump, Lothar would do a somersault backflip into a handstand, and that was the basis of our characters back then. Characters who couldn't think for themselves. More egregious examples are Ebony White and Whitewash Jones. Ebony White was a character introduced in the newspaper comic The Spirit throughout the 1940s. On top of his name being a racial pun, his physical characteristics represented the interpretation of blacks in that era, sporting large white eyes and thick pinkish lips. Whitewash Jones was not much better. He appeared alongside the Young Allies in 1941, a group of younger heroes in World War II led by Cap's sidekick Bucky Barnes. Think of the Teen Titans, but worse. Jones had the same physical traits as Ebony, but he was also portrayed as a rather dumb character, always getting the group into trouble by making dim-witted choices. Both Ebony and Whitewash also shared the stereotype of speaking in broken English, implying that blacks weren't very educated. The creator of Ebony, Will Eisner, tried to defend his creation by stating, "At the time, humor consisted in our society of bad English and physical difference in identity." However, the blatant misrepresentation of black people in his comic strip was very obvious, and he was heavily criticized for it. Moving deeper into the 40s, the stereotypes of black characters in comics didn't stop, but there was an emergence of writers attempting to create authentic black characters, rather than servants to other white male characters. In 1947, Orsi Evers and his companions published All Negro Comics #1. The comic not only featured black main characters, but was also made solely by black writers and artists, as a way to advocate for both in the comic book industry. One character featured in the book was Lion Man. Lion Man was a college-educated African American who worked with the UN. He traveled to Africa to become a cat-themed superhero that protected the world's largest uranium deposit in Africa's Gold Coast against invaders using advanced technology. You know, I felt like I've heard of a cat-themed superhero guarding an extremely viable element with advancements in technology before, but I can't quite put my finger on it. All Negro Comics #1 was the only one of its kind. This was due to outlets refusing to sell the issue once they saw it, making it hard to sell outside of Evans' hometown. Another notable character is Waku, the Prince of Bantu, who was created by Marvel's predecessor Atlas in 1954. Waku was sort of the first black hero in Marvel Comics history, but the fact that he was an African living in Africa distanced him from American white superheroes. This made it more acceptable to the prejudiced readers. A more important character came in the form of Lobo, a black gunslinger fighting bad guys in the Wild West. He was published by Dell Comics in 1965 and is the first African American comic book character to head their own title. It had a short run due to sales and retailers not wanting to sell a book with a black hero on the front. Towards the end of the Civil Rights Movement, Stan Lee became a prominent figure in the comic book industry. He created some of the greatest characters such as the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, and the X-Men during this time. Lee's goal in writing was to have his characters reflect the world around him. He gave Peter Parker self-doubt to deal with as a superpowered college student, and he set the X-Men up as a group feared by society, much like other minority groups. He manufactured characters that people could relate to, and he brought that same energy when writing black characters. He first created a side character in 1963 by the name of Gabriel Jones, an African-American soldier that served in World War II as part of Nick Fury's special unit, the Howling Commandos. He's actually in an MCU movie too. I had no idea till I started the script. However, although better written compared to black characters in the past, Gabriel wasn't a breakout character for black audiences. That wouldn't happen until 3 years later, when Stan Lee introduced Black Panther for the first time. Black Panther debuted in Fantastic Four number 52 in 1966, fighting alongside the group to stop Claw from stealing vibranium in Wakanda. He became the first black hero in mainstream comics, and his success pushed the industry forward into a much-needed diversified era. He was very popular and was soon a mainstay of the Marvel Universe, though he wouldn't get his own comic book until 1973. However, in the same way as Waku before him, T'Challa was an African superhero and did not satisfy the need for African American representation in comics. That came with the introduction of Falcon, a proper sidekick to Captain America in 1969. Stan Lee set the bar high with these two, causing a surge of black heroes to be introduced in the 70s and 80s. DC soon joined the fray, introducing Jon Stewart as a replacement for Hal Jordan as a Green Lantern in 1971. Around this time, the blaxploitation era of films had taken over the scene. Movies like Shaft and Dolomite were very popular, and their influence carried onto the page. Luke Cage was introduced in 1972 as a jive-talking, bulletproof black man who dealt with street-level problems. Luke Cage was also the first black hero to have his own mainstream series titled Hero for Hire. Following him in that time came characters like Misty Knight in 1972, Blade in 1973, and Black Lightning in 1977. They all had similar stereotypes derived from the movies, but the big two handled it very differently. I mentioned Stan Lee's method earlier because it was a blueprint for every black character from the company going forward. They were well-written characters with flaws like people in real life. In contrast, DC chose to lean into the stereotypes of the movies. Green Lantern and Black Lightning were portrayed as the defiant, angry black men, and served as aggressive, gimmicky caricatures, rather than actual characters. A few more notable accomplishments include the arrivals of Nubia, the long-lost twin of Wonder Woman, in 1973, and Storm in 1975, as the first black female superheroes in comic book history. Storm starred as a character in the X-Men and has become one of its most famous members. The first time a black superhero showed up on the big screen was in 1977, in a movie called A Bar, the first black Superman. It was a low-budget blaxploitation film about a superpowered vigilante solving problems in his neighborhood. Moving on from that, in the 1980s, DC introduced its most famous black character yet, in the form of Cyborg. This key character appeared alongside the Teen Titans, but he eventually grew so popular that he would join the ranks of heroes like Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. Even though he's the default black guy for DC now, he was always a rich character in the same vein as early Stan Lee characters. From the 90s and on, black representation in comics was no longer a large issue. However, the late Dwayne McDuffie and a group of other black creators decided that they needed a platform just like all Negro comics that was solely for the culture. They formed Milestone Media in 1993 as a company devoted to empowering people of color in the comic book industry as a whole. The books were published by DC, but the creators had the rights to the characters and editorial independence. Milestone created characters you may have heard of before, such as Icon, Rocket, Hardware, and the infamous Static, who appeared in his own Emmy Award-winning cartoon series in 2000. Hopping back over into the movie side of things, Meteor Man debuted in the same year, becoming the first mainstream movie featuring a black superhero. It bombed horrendously despite having stars like Robert Townsend, James Earl Jones, Sinbad, Cypress Hill, and Bill Cosby. It only managed to make $8 million out of its $30 million budget. Meanwhile, a little-known show called Mantis was the first show with a black superhero as its lead in 1994. Continuing with the trend of bad superhero movies, Spawn and Steel debuted in 1997. They were the first to have established black heroes as the main characters. I wish I could say it was unexpected, but the Shaq-led Steel movie that made no references to the Superman character it was based on flopped. Surprisingly, Spawn was a moderate success. The black superhero movie to save them all was Blade in 1998. The movie single-handedly kickstarted the superhero movie craze. It had 2 sequels and even a TV series that I had never heard of in 2006. After the success of Blade, not many big developments were happening for African Americans in the comic book industry, but we slowly gained achievements that would lead up to something big. Storm would appear alongside the X-Men in the 2000s. In the comics, new characters like Patriot, Blue Marvel, Goliath, Firestorm, and Power Man would be introduced. Icon and Rocket would appear in the cartoon series Young Justice in 2012. There was a pretty cool black superhero movie in the 2000s too. No, not you. There you go. A few black side characters like War Machine and Falcon began to show up in the grand MCU. The most promising development was the creation of Miles Morales in 2011, who became the Black Spider-Man after Peter Parker met his end, but we'll come back to him in a minute. In 2016, Luke Cage would become the first black superhero TV show to become a hit. On top of that, Black Lightning, which debuted in 2018, introduced the first black lesbian superhero in the form of Thunder. All of these small movements building up African American representation in the comic book world would culminate in the same year when the boundaries were pushed once again by none other than T'Challa himself. Ryan Coogler and the cast of Black Panther brought to life a stunning realization of the nation of Wakanda that was not only beautiful to look at, but also rich with its own culture and traditions to be explored. Black Panther became the highest selling superhero soaring outing of all time, grossing $1.347 billion worldwide, also becoming the 9th highest grossing film of all time for a while. The film reached new heights for the MCU and the world at large, proving that an all-black cast of memorable black characters can work. Not too long after that, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, starring Miles Morales, became a box office hit, grossing $375.5 million worldwide and winning awards from the Golden Globes to the Oscars. Black people have been waiting for a big move like this for a while, so seeing it realized with the massive positive response that came with it was a dream come true. There were a couple of things that I wanted to insert into my script but didn't quite fit anywhere. A few notable black creators who were important in shaping the way the industry works now were people like Christopher Priest, a man who was the first to work full-time with Marvel and DC and wrote one of the greatest runs of Black Panther to date. Dennis Coleman, who co-created Static and drew comics for Steel, Power Man, and Deathlock. Jackie Orms, who drew strips for the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier from the 30s to the 50s. Matt Baker, who is the first known African American comic book artist, making his debut penciling a cover story in Jumbo Comics number 69 in 1944. And Billy Graham, who helped shape the character of Luke Cage in the early 70s. The history of black people struggling to get more representation in everything in America is a story that is not new to anyone, but I wanted to share a lesser known story about the fight to get us on the page. We started off a bit rocky with heavy stereotypes and oppression in writing, but eventually our influence and persistence got us to where we are today. We've got a long way to go, but the future is looking bright for African Americans in the world of superheroes. To finish off this history lesson, I wanted to let you in on a few new things regarding black people in comic books that you may not know about. Milestone Media has returned, starting with an event called Milestone Returns in 2020. Static is slated to get his own movie sometime in the future. There's a new Batman running around in comics right now that's African American. We won't spoil who it is, but it's an interesting look into the future of the DCU. Blade is getting a new movie in a few years, starring Mahershala Ali, with Stacey O.C. Kafur from Watchmen to write. Black Lightning is entering its final season. A new CW series starring a black female superhero named Naomi is coming to the network. Speaking of the CW, Batwoman is now a black woman. I don't know if that makes the show any better, but hey, who knows. Miles Morales has his own video game now and is expected to return in Spider-Verse 2 in 2022. He may even pop up in Spider-Man 3 if they get that multiverse thing going. A Disney Plus series about Ironheart is coming soon. She's a 15-year-old college student who managed to create an Iron Man suit all on her own and replace Iron Man for a limited time. The Falcon has his own TV series with the Winter Soldier in March, where he is expected to take up the mantle of Captain America, something he did once in the comic before. A Black Panther sequel is in the works, with Shuri may be stepping up to be the Black Panther herself, which is also a thing that happened in the comics. And last but not least, Monica Rambeau is currently appearing in WandaVision, and will be appearing in the Captain Marvel sequel later. I'm excited to see what they do with her character, since she's a very powerful superhero in the comics. Hints to her powers have already been shown in the show, but it's probably something no one has caught on to yet. I may even make a video on her after the series is over to get other people excited too. That's all for this video. If you like the content, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more. And also, be sure to check out the second video in this mini-series for Black History Month.